afternoon, church. Let me wish you a blessed 41st anniversary for the English service. And the sermon today is taken from the Old Testament lectionary passage from Isaiah. And we notice the title, Do You Not Know, Have You Not Heard? Are questions that appear twice in this passage. The first in verse 21, and then the next time it appears is in verse 28. And it is as if the prophet is reminding Israel about something that they have forgotten. And it is important because he asked it twice. He asked this set of questions twice. Do you not know? Have you not heard? I wonder if you have ever interacted with someone with dementia before. Of course, we know dementia has many stages, and it's very heartbreaking, especially for those who are on a serious dementia that they can't even recognize their own loved ones. But what is it like interacting with someone with dementia? Most of the time, they will ask the same question over and over again, isn't it? My wife, Gillian's grandmother, lived to a ripe old age of 96 years old before she was called home in 2018. Now, in the last couple of years of her life, she had dementia. And when we visited her, she would ask Gillian the same questions over and over again. What day is it today? Don't you need to work? And then after a few minutes of conversation, she would ask the same question. What day is it today? Don't you need to work? And so that's how it is like for many of us who interact with people with dementia. She also had a sweet tooth, and she loved her ice cream. Right? So, but the problem is, after we have given her the ice cream, she would insist that she has not eaten it and ask for it again, right? And again and again. Well, as God's people, Israel seemed to have a case of spiritual dementia, such that the prophet Isaiah had to remind them twice through this set of rhetorical questions. Do you not know? Have you not heard? It's rhetorical because those facts that he mentioned about God, they ought to know. But their circumstances seem to have caused them to forget. For their complaint was expressed clearly in verse 27. Why do you say, Jacob, and you assert, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and the justice due me escapes the notice of my God? So for the people of Israel, they felt that God does not care about them. Whatever they are going through is hidden from the Lord, and God has not given them due justice. Well, Israel has forgotten how God has helped them time and time again in the past. In a sense, we ourselves today perhaps are no exception, because we often exhibit the signs of spiritual dementia too. See, when we go through a tough time, we often forget how God has helped us in the past, and we begin to question why God all over again and doubt His love for us. And so in today's passage, perhaps we can try, or we can see an important link between faith and memory. In a sense, faith begins with memory, and it builds upon memory. When our memory fails, our faith is threatened. And in this passage, in the context of this passage, we can see a few things that might have affected Israel's memory. Isaiah 40 was addressed to Judeans, right, Israelites, who were exiled in Babylon. And due to their repeated disobedience to God and rejection of God's prophets and their warnings, despite God giving them chance after chance, the southern kingdom of Judah finally fell to Babylon in 586 BCE. So in exile in a foreign land, Israel had no more land of their own, no more temple. The majestic temple built by Solomon, was destroyed by the Babylonians. And it seemed to them no more God, because they thought that perhaps their God was limited by the boundaries of the land. And so perhaps in Babylon, which was far from Israel, they had no more God. All these were their identity markers which they had lost. So let's quickly look at 4 realities which affected Israel's memory of her faith and God. 4 realities they were immersed in, that they were tempted to trust in or perhaps be overwhelmed by. And this extends beyond our passage to a few more verses before verse 21. The first reality, perhaps we can say, is the empire, the Babylonian Empire. Right? For the exiled Israelites, the only reality that they knew was Babylon. The empire, the Babylonian Empire, had after all defeated them, destroyed their capital, and exiled so many of them. Every day they slept and woke up in a foreign land in Babylon. They were surrounded by the food, the culture, and the language of the Babylonians. But Isaiah gives them a different view. In Isaiah 40, verses 15 to 17, it says, "Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are regarded as a speck of dust on the scales. Behold, he lifts up the islands like fine dust. Even Lebanon is not enough to burn, nor its animals enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are regarded by him as less than nothing and meaningless." The implication isn't that God doesn't care about the nations or Lebanon or its forests and animals. It is to tell us that they aren't a threat to him. And so, Isaiah presents this view to the Israelites. And so Babylon, no matter how powerful it seemed as an empire, was as nothing to God. The second reality that weakened Israel's memory of God and their faith were the Babylonian idols. It was not just the food and culture, but also religion. In a foreign land, they were surrounded by the foreign gods that the Babylonians worshipped. And since Babylon was the victor, it would appear as if the Babylonian gods were more powerful than Israel's God. Because don't forget what happened to the temple of Israel's God. It was destroyed by the Babylonians. It was quite likely that some of the Israelites might be tempted or might be drawn to worship the Babylonian gods. But in this environment, in this context, Isaiah presents them again with a different view. In verse 18 to 20, he says, "To whom then will you liken God?" As we have sung earlier in our hymn earlier. "Or what likeness will you compare with him? As for the idol, a craftsman cast it, a goldsmith plates it with gold, and a silversmith fashions chains of silver. He who is too impoverished for such an offering selects a tree that does not rot. He seeks out for himself a skillful craftsman to prepare an idol that will not totter." Isaiah reminds them that the idols were actually made by men themselves. And we know that the reason Israel was exiled to Babylon was not because their God was weak, but because they had sinned repeatedly against God. The third reality that would have affected Israel's memory was the rulers and kings of Babylon. It would seem to them that they were in absolute control and were untouchable. You see, one word from the king could decide whether a person lives or dies. And they were citizens, after all, from a defeated country, exiled to Babylon. They were certainly second class or even lower class citizens. But in that context, in that environment, Isaiah again presents them with the truth from God, a different view. In verses 22 to 24, he says, "It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to live in. It is he who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Scarcely have they been planted, scarcely have they been sown, scarcely have their stock taken root in the earth, but he merely blows on them and they wither, and the storm carries them away like stubble." Isaiah reminds them that however powerful the Babylonian kings may seem, God was still in control.
The fourth reality that threatened Israel's memory are the stars in the sky and the other heavenly bodies, which the Babylonians took much notice of and may even have worshipped. And many people perhaps in our world today still do, reading their weekly or daily horoscopes. But Isaiah gives them again a different picture or a different view. Raise your eyes on high and see who has created these stars, the one who brings out their multitude by number. He calls them all by name. Because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one of them is missing. He reminds them that God is the one who created the stars and named them. Have you ever had the privilege of seeing a sky filled with stars? Not in Singapore, probably, in some other places in the world. Right? Under such skies, would you even notice if one of the stars went missing? Yet, Isaiah tells us, God knows. So we can look at our passage today in two parts, separated in the middle by Isaiah's complaint, or by the Israelites' complaint in verse 27. Why do you say, Jacob, and you assert, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and the justice due me escapes the notice of my God? See, in the passage before this verse, Isaiah talks about God's greatness, which we have already examined briefly in all the realities that the exiled Israelites were faced with. And after this verse, Isaiah talks about God's nearness. God's greatness does not make him a faraway God, does not make him unapproachable or untouchable like the Babylonian kings. Instead, the verses after this tell us he is a God who does not grow weary. And he draws near to all those who are tired and weary in order to give them his great strength. Right? If he is to give us his strength, he has to draw near to us. In a way, you can say that this is a purpose, the purpose of his power, to give it to those who are tired and weary, to give it to those who are faint and weary. But not just to any who are faint and weary, but only to those who wait on him, who put their trust in him. In response and in closing, brothers and sisters, let me suggest two ways to help us fight spiritual dementia. For make no mistake about it, spiritual dementia or spiritual forgetfulness is sin. We see this in the history of Israel. They quickly forgot how God parted the Red Sea for them to escape from Egypt and started complaining that there was no food and no water for them in the desert, blaming Moses for leading them there. Even after God provided manna and water for them, they complained that the menu, was too monotonous. There was no meat. Every day is just this manna. And during the period of the judges, after they entered the promised land, we know that they would sin repeatedly against the Lord. As a result, God allowed their enemies to punish them. And then in the midst of their punishment, of their suffering, they would repent and God would rescue them. But not long after, the cycle repeats itself over and over again, round after round in the time of the judges. So they seem to be suffering from spiritual dementia. And of course, how they ended up in Babylon was also because they forgot God and all his commandments. But on the other hand, we do not want to make light of anyone's suffering. Can you imagine today for a Christian brother or sister who is in Palestine or in Ukraine, whose home has been destroyed and all semblance of a normal life is gone? Or a Christian brother or sister in these areas who have lost their loved ones through the violence of war. For such a brother or sister, can we understand if they tell us today that God does not exist? Can we understand if they tell us today that they have forgotten about God because they see no trace of him in their lives? I suspect we can, and we can understand with how they feel. But, brothers and sisters, it would still be a sin to forget about God. Spiritual forgetfulness, dementia, is still a sin. And I think there are some, perhaps in our midst, who, while we might not have our homes destroyed, but we are suffering, perhaps mentally, emotionally, or even physically. How do we remember God in the midst of our suffering? How do we remember God in the midst of our troubles? I would like to suggest 2 ways. And the first is this: our individual memory may fail, but our collective memory must not. And that is why our weekly service, worship service, our weekly gathering as church is important. This is the 41st year that the English service has met. In the past 41 years, we have met week after week without fail, without interruption. Even during COVID days, we continue to meet online. Through the liturgy of the worship service, we are reminded of who God is and what His promises are for us. We open our mouths to sing, to pray, and we do it with our fellow brothers and sisters, those who are seated beside us, in front of us, behind us. They are fellow pilgrims on this journey. See, when we do that, when we sing, when we open up our mouths to sing, we are not just singing to God, but we are singing to one another as well. And then we also let the choir sing to us while we listen, and let those words that they sing sink into us. And those words that we sing are specially curated songs whose lyrics are full of theological significance, whose lyrics are full of knowledge, truths about God. And today, we will also observe the Holy Communion. And in the Holy Communion, why do we say the same words over and over again? Again, so that we will remember. Each time at the Holy Communion, we recount the story of our salvation, how God rescued us from sin and delivered us into His salvation, so that we will not forget. At different parts of our service, we stand and we sit. You see, our whole body and all our senses are engaged in the worship service, whether we are using our ears to hear, our mouth to sing, our body to stand or sit or to speak. And we do it in community, so that even if one person may forget due to his or her difficult circumstances, the others around him can remind him or her. And that is why our worship is a means of grace. The second way we can remember God in the midst of our troubles, in the midst of our suffering, is more obviously stated in the passage today, is that we must learn to wait on the Lord. When will the Ukraine-Russia war end? When will the Israel-Hamas or Israel-Palestine war end? For the Israelites who were exiled to Babylon, they wondered when they would ever be able to go back to their own land. We don't have the answers, but we are told to wait on the Lord. Because those who wait on the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings as eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. But what does waiting on the Lord mean? I believe the picture of waiting that the Bible presents to us does not mean we sit around and just sigh and do nothing. It means to hope, because hope is what makes waiting possible. And as Christians, our ultimate hope is that Christ will come back and make all things right. Christ will come back and restore all things. So what we hope for is at the same time what we should be working towards. As the verse reminds us, those who wait, those who hope, are those who would mount up with wings as eagles, those who walk and those who run. No matter what your age is, what your energy level is. You see, those who wait, a lot of times we think that those who wait are just sitting there doing nothing. But the verse that we all are very familiar with, in verse 31, tells us gives us another view. Perhaps those who are waiting are not just sitting around doing nothing. Those who can walk are walking. Those who can run are running. And those who can fly are soaring on wings as eagles. Right? So our hope and our wait is an active one. What we hope for in our families, in our churches, in our communities, in our nation is what we should be working towards. In the words of a Palestinian pastor, Mitri Raheb, he says this: hope is what we do today. Hope is what we do today. My dear brothers and sisters, no matter how difficult a situation you may be facing today, a situation that threatens to overwhelm you, that causes you to have spiritual dementia, or if you know of someone who already has spiritual dementia and has stopped coming to church, may we be reminded of the importance of our collective memory as a church, as an English service. May we be reminded of the words that we already have in our Bibles, in our prayers, in our liturgies, in our hymns, in our songs that have been passed down from generation to generation. And so may we remind each other to hope and to wait. And in the midst of that hoping and that waiting, what we hope for is also what we should be working towards. Whether you are running, walking, or flying, right? Those who cannot run, we walk. Those who cannot fly, we run. Those who cannot run, we walk, right? So hope is what we do today. And so may God use these words from Isaiah today to give us hope, to teach us to wait, and to remind us that our collective memory as a church is what will hold us up in times when we are threatened when our circumstances threaten to overwhelm us. May God help us and bless us, even as we celebrate our 41st anniversary. May we continue for many years to come to be that congregation that reminds one another of these words. May God bless you.